On the day before the Jamesons disappear, they load their pickup truck and drive 30 miles to Oklahoma's Panola Mountain.
They were looking for property. They were looking to go buy 40 acres of land in a very rural area.
The Jamesons had actually learned about the land on the internet.
The parcel of land is situated in a remote area near an abandoned oil well.
It is really forested area. There's a lot of cliffs and ravines. That's what they like, though. They liked nature.
Those who know Bobby and Sherilyn Jameson say the couple looked at Panola Mountain as a fresh start, a new beginning for them and their young daughter.
They like to go look at land and imagine what if and fantasize about, building whatever. Their dream businesses, homes, whatever.
Nikki Shenold has been Sherilyn Jameson's closest friend for more than 10 years.
She used to say a lot, you have to stand for something. I don't care what you stand for, but you have to stand for something. When she believed in something, she believed in it with her whole heart.
Friends and family say that when Sherilyn met Bobby Jameson in the summer of 2002, she knew he was the man for her.
Sherilyn decided right then and there that she liked him and she was interested. Bobby was a very gentle man. He was a good man. He didn't want to do anybody wrong.
They fell in love and got married in July of 2004. Later that summer, the Jamesons have a baby girl and name her Madison.
Madison was my son's, I guess, the best gift in his whole life.
Where are you going, Tizzy? Looky, there you are on TV.
She was just, a beautiful child, and her and I were best friends.
Madison.
For Bobby and Sherilyn, moving to Panola Mountain is the next step in building a simpler life. They're excited to join the small community living there, people who prize independence and self-sufficiency.
There's very few people that live up there. Even the ones that do have the bare minimum needs.
In order to have electricity, you have to really have a generator. Some people have septic systems, some people don't. It's a pretty rustic way of life.
When it comes to being off-grid, they're as close as you probably could be in this area.
On the morning the Jamesons start to explore the mountain where they hope to make their new home, they become lost in a maze of dirt roads. They run into one of the handful of people living up there and ask for directions.
He's out there working, he sees them come up. They're talking about buying land in that area. They're asking him questions about, okay, how do you build on a place, How do you do the things that you need to do to be able to live in this area?
Bobby and Sherilyn get directions to the plot of land they're considering and decide to return the next day. The following morning, they drive back up the mountain, looking forward to seeing the place where they would live out their dreams.
I think they wanted to get away from everybody and be able to enjoy life on their own, not to have to answer to anybody.
It's pretty desolate, but I think desolate at that point was what they were looking for. They were just kind of looking to start anew and kind of get away from mainstream.
But the Jamesons' outing comes to an unexpected and mysterious end. 8 days later, hunters on four-wheelers find a locked truck parked on a dirt road near the top of Panola Mountain.
They peeked in the window and they saw a dog, and the dog was not doing so well. It had been locked in that truck for multiple days.
There wasn't any food for the dog. She was a survivor. She was a survivor to live through that.
There is no sign of the Jamesons anywhere on the hilltop. The Latimer County Sheriff's Office is called.
The call just came in that there's an abandoned truck up there. We broke the glass, got the dog out of there. We started to do an inventory on the vehicle to try to find out who they were.
When he began to find things in there, he knew that it was something definitely was wrong. They had cell phones in their truck, and their billfolds were there, her purse was there, it was like they had just disappeared.
Because their coats, phones, and money are all left behind, police believe that Bobby and Sherilyn, along with their 6-year-old daughter Madison, must be lost nearby in the woods.
After we started looking through everything, we we were figuring, okay, they're up here.
It'd be quite easy for somebody to go out there and get bit by a snake and to not be able to get back to the truck and just to not be able to find your way around.
Police conduct an immediate search of the area surrounding the truck.
I had 5 or 6 deputies up there. Started calling out their names once we figured out who they were, trying to get some type of reply from them.
Rugged terrain makes the search doubly challenging.
You can get lost in the woods up there very easily, unless you know where you're going. Because if you get in the midst of the trees, you can't see, very far ahead.
For law enforcement, time is of the essence.
There was a child missing. It was getting towards, end of October. The nights were getting colder, and they didn't have their jackets with them because those were left in the truck.
We knew that they had been there 8 to 9 days, and you're getting on that timeline there to where, the chances of making it, we're at that point now.
Why hadn't anyone reported that the Jameson family had been missing for 8 days? The few people that saw their truck guessed that it belonged to a work crew.
There's a lot of wells up in that area, oil wells, gas wells. So a lot of people thought it was just people with oil field that had come in.
Also, the Jamesons were a very private family, and it wasn't unusual for them to hunker down for several days or longer without speaking to friends or family members.
They had a habit of going out of town for extended periods of time and not really letting anybody know.
We could go a year and not talk and pick up the phone and act as if no time had gone by. I mean, that's just the relationship that we had. There's a lot of reasons why no one was alarmed.
Bobby and Sherilyn had also just pulled 6-year-old Madison out of school in preparation for homeschooling her.
The school didn't realize that, Madison wasn't there because she had been taken out.
If it wasn't for the hunters coming down and telling the man that lived close to him about the vehicle, it could have been that much longer.
The sheriff's men on Panola Mountain realized that by now, the Jamesons could be anywhere. They used the family's cell phones to help reconstruct their last known movements.
As we checked the GPS from the phone, we had found out that they didn't spend the majority of the time parked there.
GPS coordinates lead police up a nearby hill, where they find footprints.
The 6-year-old's footprints were there, and that was obvious and easy to identify.
We were able to follow their footprints as well as follow the GPS on the camera up to a rock.
They determined that the Jamesons spend about 15 or 20 minutes up the hill from their truck, and remarkably, they find an eerie memento of the family's time on the hill.
The cell phone had a picture on it of Madison. They'd actually taken the picture on a small bluff that was just north of the location, maybe just a couple 100 yards.
It's the last picture that we have of Madison.
It appears to police that after taking the photo, the Jamesons return to their truck and start to leave. What happened next is shrouded in mystery. Then, while scouring the cab for more clues, a deputy sheriff makes a stunning discovery.
He said, "I've got something to tell you, and I think you need to come up here." And I said, "Okay, what's going on?" And he told me, he said, "Hey, there is a substantial amount of money in this vehicle."
A bank bag hidden beneath the driver's seat contains $32,000 in cash.
I wondered why. Why is all this money in here?
Anytime any large amount of cash is found in a vehicle, it raises a lot of red flags.
So at that moment, I said, okay, get everybody away, tape it off as if it was a crime scene. Don't know, what's going on yet, but tape it off.
We really weren't sure why they disappeared.
Coming up, evidence points to a violent event in the Jamesons' disappearance.
I think that they were probably forced out at gunpoint. I mean, why would you struggle if...
Bobby and Sherilyn Jameson and their 6-year-old daughter Madison have disappeared. Investigators find the family's truck abandoned in the Oklahoma backcountry.
A pickup sitting down there, with all of their goods and the dog locked inside the car was very suspicious.
Investigators are confounded by their most recent discovery. A hidden bank bag containing $2,000 in cash.
It's very unlikely that they would leave the vehicle there and lock their cell phones and their wallets and leave all of that in the car on their own accord, but we really didn't know.
Investigators are also baffled that the family dog was apparently left to die in the cab of the truck.
Madison, once she had that puppy, never went anywhere without the puppy.
It just doesn't make any sense, because that was Madison's friend, and she would have screamed and hollered if he'd left the dog in the car.
The whole fact that the dog was in the truck locked up and they're nowhere to be found tells me that they got out of the truck in a hurry.
Even the cell phone picture of 6-year-old Madison prompts speculation among some of their friends.
I don't think her parents took that picture. I think that somebody else that she did not know took that picture. She had her arms out like this and her hand was over in a weird position. She was looking off. It wasn't a real smile. She looked very uncomfortable to me. Very uncomfortable.
Police theorized that the Jamesons were in their truck heading back down the mountain when they were interrupted.
It seemed to me like they were leaving, and that someone came up that one-way road, and they stopped. Maybe they knew him, maybe not well. They stopped, talked to the person. From there, obviously, I don't know what happened.
But investigators find no signs of a struggle at the scene of the truck.
Signs of struggle for life or death would be violent. That's not going to be some small tussle.
There was no blood found on the vehicle. There was no broken glass.
You're obviously looking for disturbance on the ground. When people fight, there's clothes that's shredded, there's things that fall out of pockets. Whenever it's that violent, something would be left to show that there was something that happened there.
Still, friends and family think the scene suggests that the Jamesons left against their will.
I think that they were probably forced out at gunpoint. I mean, why would you struggle if someone has a gun to you?
Hopeful for a lead, investigators process every item found in the truck.
At this point, there were so many different things that led us in different directions. We weren't sure if they were lost, we weren't sure if they were abducted.
Then, buried in the clutter filling the cab, they stumble upon something they never expected. An 11-page letter written from Sherilyn to her husband, brimming with hostility.
She was lashing out big time in this letter to Bobby.
It was just a hate and discontent. The years of fighting. She felt that he wanted to be a loner and didn't really need a family. And other than that, I mean, it was just a lot of hate.
Investigators learn that in recent months, there were serious stresses in the Jamesons' marriage.
We learned from their family members that they were having problems. We had learned from the letter that they were talking about getting divorced.
They had been looking at selling their house and kind of moving away to get away from that to make things better.
Much of the strain dates back to 2003, when Bobby was involved in a serious auto accident.
Bobby was driving his truck in 2003, and he had a wreck. He was coming around a curve, which is a blind curve in the road, and this lady hit him from one side, and another lady hit him from the other side.
Since the accident, Bobby suffered from chronic pain and was unable to work.
It is very hard for him to get up out of bed even. Medicine wasn't really helping relieve the pain.
It made it hard for him to do things around the home, and I think that the pain every day, chronic pain, really put a toll on his spirits, and I think he became depressed, and it made things more difficult in the marriage.
The letter forces investigators to consider a violent scenario in the Jamesons' disappearance. Their concerns heighten when family members tell them that a pistol belonging to Sherilyn Jameson cannot be found.
We didn't know about the .22 pistol until that moment, so we said, no, we haven't found a pistol, and they told us, okay, well, actually she carries this pistol in the vehicle.
Investigators search the Jamesons' truck and house thoroughly. When they find no pistol, they begin to fear the worst.
We got a pistol missing, we have a hate letter here, we're starting to get to point toward maybe murder-suicide. We thought to ourselves that maybe it was her that had killed them.
Coming up, leads in the Jamesons' disappearance go from confusing to downright bizarre.
Bobby had asked him, okay, Is there a special bullet that I can buy to kill these?
Missing for nearly 2 days. The possibility of foul play comes to the forefront of the investigation as police learn more about a troubled marriage and Sherilyn's missing pistol.
A pistol being missing is important. We were told by family members that she carried the pistol everywhere. Maybe this was a murder-suicide.
If a murder-suicide had occurred, the Jameson bodies would still be somewhere on Panola Mountain. On October 17th, less than 24 hours after their truck was found, law enforcement begins a massive search.
The emergency management in Latimer County got a hold of all the fire departments in this area, EMS, forestry. Local people started showing up with horses, four-wheelers.
They didn't know where to go, where to start looking. So they just took teams and went up there.
All of the resources of Latimer County are brought to bear. Helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, tracking dogs, teams of horses and mule, and hundreds of personnel all assist in the search effort. The rough terrain makes everything twice as hard.
There's a triple canopy, a lot of woods, a lot of rocks, almost all of it straight uphill, and very, very tough conditions to try to do a search in.
It was also hazardous and dangerous because a lot of the people didn't know the woods and they could get lost.
Walking up those mountains and trying to keep a straight line and everybody intact is very, very hard to do in that type of terrain.
Tracking dogs are also brought up to Panola Mountain to aid in the search effort.
There were dogs that we brought up to the scene, both cadaver dogs and air scent dogs, to try to locate the Jameson family.
We used some articles from the vehicle to let the dogs take a sniff of it, try to get familiar with their scent.
The dogs start at the truck and fan outward through the surrounding terrain.
They were very interested at the top of the mountain as well as around the truck. They didn't really want to leave that area.
Although acres of woods surround the open area at the top of Panola Mountain, the dogs don't venture off the plateau. They alert on a nearby water tank, signaling investigators to the possible presence of human remains.
The tank was full of water, and the dogs seemed to have hit on it quite a bit. Obviously, we were thinking to ourselves, okay, they might be dead bodies in this tank.
The tank is drained and examined, but nothing is found inside. Search teams scour the mountainside, but find no bodies.
I find it impossible for you to be able to hide your own body. Yes, you may be able to hide one or two that you'd obviously kill, but to hide your own body would be nearly impossible.
That conclusion brings a measure of relief to Jameson's friends and family, who have trouble believing Sherilyn capable of murder.
I don't think there was any way, even if Sherilyn was depressed, that she would shoot Bobby. I know they had a lot of arguments and they had fights about things, but she truly loved Bobby and Bobby loved her.
To help spread the word about the Jamesons, missing posters are created and distributed around southeastern Oklahoma.
There was effort made to get information out to the public and to let them know that they were missing.
We took the picture of Madison off of their cell phone that they had taken up on the mountain. We put her age, height, her hair, date of birth. We used the driver's license of Sherilyn and Bobby, and we done the same for them.
So anybody that walked by, you could see, hey, I didn't know them, or, I saw them the other day.
Although their focus shifts away from murder-suicide, investigators continue to uncover strange details about the Jamesons' lives. They discover that Bobby, and especially Sherilyn, had a strong interest in spirituality.
Sherilyn had some beliefs that were not commonly shared with other people, and I think she had a tendency to exaggerate them and go a little bit overboard with them.
In the weeks prior to their disappearance, the Jamesons attended prayer meetings conducted by a local preacher, who was later interviewed by investigators.
He was talking about them seeing spirits, that they came to him and was talking to him about seeing spirits.
The preacher tells investigators that Sherilyn said that angels were coming into their home in the form of children and interacting with her 6-year-old daughter.
I know that Sherilyn had said that Madison was talking to people that had died, and one of them was named Emily. I don't think it was someone dead. I think it was an imaginary being that she, had, to cope with some of the things that were going on in her life. It's very hard for a small child to be somewhere where there's arguments going on.
The preacher also tells police that Bobby Jamison believed that he saw spirits on the roof of their lakeside Eufaula home. It's a disturbing revelation.
It was 3 or 4 spirits that were giving them trouble, and mostly talking about him being on the roof. We had also found out from him that Bobby had asked him, okay, is there a special bullet that I can buy to kill these spirits?
That makes me sad. I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know what that would be about.
Friends and family are not clear on what Bobby may have been going through to explain such unusual behavior.
It's a mystery to me. I don't know where that came from, and I don't know the minister. I don't know the church. I've never been there before. It just doesn't sound like him to say something like that.
According to police, Sherilyn had also spray-painted odd phrases on signs and buildings in their neighborhood, including the storage container they had sitting on their lakefront property.
Sherilyn had a cat that had passed away, and she believed that it had been poisoned, and that raised a lot of issues within the neighborhood.
The graffiti said something along the lines of witches don't like their cats being killed.
I know she's told the neighbors around here she's a witch, and come on in for some witch's brew, and I think it scared people off, but I think she just didn't want to be bothered by people.
Sherilyn used to tell me, if you have a problem with somebody, make them think you're crazy. The crazier they think you are, the more they'll leave you alone. It's true, it worked. You spray paint some crazy stuff on there and people think you are crazy. I don't think anybody bothered them after that.
For investigators, the clues and odd revelations about the Jamisons' lives are not adding up to a coherent whole.
When you do an investigation, one of the ways that most of us were taught, you actually get rid of each scenario that could have happened. So a process of elimination on it. And in this case, we haven't been able to completely eliminate anything.
This has been a very bizarre thing. I mean, there are so many pieces to this puzzle, and every day you find a new piece, something else comes up.
After the Jamisons have been missing for 7 days, a lead finally surfaces that appears to turn the investigation around. Law enforcement learns that the Jamison home is outfitted with surveillance cameras and that recordings were made up to the time of the family's disappearance.
Both cameras were pointed toward the driveway of the residence. We have the footage of their home surveillance that morning of them getting ready and preparing to come up to the mountain.
In the eerie-looking surveillance video, recorded on the day they disappeared, the Jamisons are seen packing their truck.
The family was found going in and out of the home multiple times, back and forth to the car in somewhat of a trance-like state.
We found it odd that they had to go back and forth so many times. I would say safely each one of them, without it being an exaggeration, went 20 times back and forth. They never acknowledged each other as they were walking back and forth from the vehicle. Never acknowledged each other. It's like they were the only persons in the world.
Speculating that the Jamisons' behavior may indicate an involvement with drugs, Sheriff Beecham shows the recording to experts.
I actually had psychologists look at the footage of them leaving their house from their security cameras, trying to get an idea of what type of people they thought they were. It made me and the psychologist feel that they were on some type of drug at that time.
If the Jamisons were involved with drugs, in Latimer County, that usually means one thing.
We automatically assume here in southeastern Oklahoma, if you're on a drug, that it's methamphetamine because we have such a problem with it here.
Coming up, could a violent incident a month before the Jamisons disappeared be the key to solving the case?
And then she put the gun to his head and said, you need to go. You need to leave right now and don't come back.
14 days. But now, a recovered surveillance video leads investigators to suspect a drug connection in their disappearance.
They felt that there was a possibility that Sherilyn and Bobby had been doing methamphetamines or other drugs by their behaviors on the video surveillance.
It can come in a powder form. It can come in a crystal form. They like to call it the redneck cocaine.
Some sort of drug connection could possibly help explain the bank bag with $32,000 found in the Jamesons' truck.
In this area, you find that much money, automatically you start to think about drugs.
But the Jamesons' friends and family believe that connecting them to illicit drug use is both wrong and unfair.
I don't know anything about having drugs or any of that. People jump to conclusions. They don't know what's happening.
I feel like a lot of the things that could be helpful in this case are almost being used to make them seem like druggies or whatever, and they weren't. They weren't at all. Everyone is speculating as to what were they really doing up there. Well, they were looking at land. It doesn't mean that they were up to no good.
Family members can also explain the seemingly suspicious array of surveillance cameras on the house. Bobby's mother says they had nothing to do with drugs. The cameras were installed for personal reasons, involving her now deceased husband.
Surveillance cameras put on the house for protection. My husband had threatened me several different times. He also threatened my son and Sherilyn. And I had the cameras installed. I'm the one that did that. I also had a security system put on my house because I was afraid. And it's hard to live through life being afraid.
FBI agents conduct a thorough search of the Jamesons' house and property.
There were no traces of methamphetamine in the home or in the vehicle.
As far as I know, the FBI did not find any drugs.
Investigators are unable to make a clear connection between the Jamesons' disappearance and drugs. But delving deeper into their personal lives, police uncover information that could explain some of Sherilyn's apparently erratic behavior.
After meeting with Sherilyn's mental health provider, we learned that she suffered from bipolar disorder and that she had been struggling for many years with the condition.
According to friends and family, Sherilyn didn't always stay on her prescribed medication.
It's a hard thing to accept that you have to take medication to be normal the rest of your life. She would do what a lot of depressed people do when you start feeling good because of the medication. You're like, oh, I'm good now, and you get off the medication and then you're worse off because your brain's trying to catch up.
I mean, she was like two different people. When she was taking her meds and taking them properly, she would be the happiest person on earth.
Sherilyn's condition could explain some of the more unusual writings in her journal, including the hostile letter written to her husband that police found in the Jamesons' truck.
When she would go in the other state of her bipolarism, she would be angry, hateful, belittling herself.
Sherilyn didn't write a word unless she was writing what was going on in her head. And that's why the journal was so disturbed.
Despite Sherilyn's sometimes erratic behavior, investigators believe that her bipolar disorder played no part in the family's disappearance. According to friends and family, her illness and Bobby's chronic pain did create enormous tensions in their marriage. But they looked at moving to Panola Mountain as a second chance at happiness.
They were trying to make a go of it. They were trying to get back together. And I think they thought if they moved up there, they could, just start a new life. My son loved her very, very much, as well as he did his daughter. And she loved them back.
By November 1st, the family has been missing for more than 3 weeks. Investigators are stumped.
Most investigators would love to have the amount of evidence we have. And the problem is that it leads us in every which direction.
Then, just when they are running out of angles, a stunning new lead surfaces. Police learn that a few months before they disappeared, Bobby and Sherilyn took in a boarder.
There was an individual that was living with them, and this individual was there to help work on the residents.
Because of his chronic back pain, Bobby thought having another set of hands around would ease the burden on both him and Sherilyn. But according to friends, the boarder began to make Sherilyn uncomfortable when Bobby wasn't around.
Sherilyn and Madison both felt very threatened by this fellow who had been staying with them.
Investigators learn of one incident that was especially disturbing to Sherilyn.
Bobby had left to go somewhere, and the man that was staying here sat down next to her, real close, and put his face right in her face and said, I'm a white supremacist, and you keep thinking about all this Indian blood you have. And I think anybody who's not pure white needs to die.
Sherilyn takes Madison away and returns with one of Bobby's guns.
She was scared for her child, and Bobby. And she pointed the gun at the guy and said, "Get off this property and don't come back."
Sherilyn fires live rounds near the boarder's feet to drive him away.
She was really torn up about that. She felt really bad about it. I mean, she was crying to me, telling me this and saying, "I've never held a gun to anyone before."
Investigators learn that the man has an extensive police record.
Obviously, this person became a great interest to us.
If you threaten someone and then they make you leave at gunpoint, that's a pretty big indicator that you might be wanting to retaliate.
The FBI launches an investigation to identify and track down the former boarder.
The FBI felt that he quite possibly could have brought them harm.
Coming up, investigators zero in on the Jamesons' boarder. What does he know about their disappearance?
This isn't a random crime. This is something that was premeditated. Somebody knew they were going to be there that day, and they took advantage of that.
And their daughter Madison have been missing for 3 weeks. But the investigation into their disappearance is finally working with a solid lead. Police learn that a month before they disappeared, a live-in handyman allegedly threatened Sherilyn's life. She forced him to leave their home at gunpoint. His current whereabouts are unknown.
We found out all the information we needed about the individual.
Investigators learn the boarder's name from a prescription bottle found in the Jamesons' truck.
We put it out to the U.S. Marshals.
U.S. Marshals find the man living in Wilburton, Oklahoma, and detain him.
U.S. Marshals tracked him down, and the FBI did interview him.
In the interview, the former boarder is able to account for his time during the Jamesons' disappearance. The FBI doesn't consider him to be a suspect. Investigators again find themselves back at square one.
I really don't know where to go from here other than each time that we get a lead, follow up on the lead.
Friends and family believe that despite the crushing challenges in their lives, the Jamesons were planning for a brighter future until something or someone got in their way.
They were trying to love each other the best they could, But knowing all of that, now, it really makes me sad because they didn't get that chance to start over fresh.
Over the weeks and months that follow, investigators check out each and every lead that comes their way.
There's a rumor of them being in trouble with, whether it be organized crime or just small-time gangs or crimes. That is all rumor. And we don't know any of that for a fact. But we can't get rid of that. So it's still there.
But the rumors don't lead to a break in the case. The FBI doesn't currently consider anyone to be a suspect in the Jamesons' disappearance.
At this time, we have no suspects. And until evidence comes to life to show differently, there are no suspects.
Sheriff Beecham believes it's probable that the Jamesons were kidnapped or taken by force. He just doesn't have the evidence to prove it.
Because of everything being left in there and the way the vehicle was parked, they got out of that vehicle after they were trying to leave the location because somebody had drove up there. Somebody had drove up there and blocked their path.
It's so rural up there that you wouldn't just cross paths. This isn't a random crime. This is something that was premeditated. Somebody knew they were going to be there that day, and they took advantage of that.
Whether they made them leave by gunpoint force or they got in voluntarily, I don't know. And what happened from there, I don't know. But that is my current theory on what had happened.
Both family and investigators are frustrated by the magnitude of the mystery surrounding the Jamesons.
Most of the time people will tell you, and I hate saying it, but you need to find bodies, whether alive or dead. To usually solve a case like this, you need the bodies.
Right now, we just need everyone's help in finding them and locating them because not knowing is very hard.
I've used more resources than most people have ever used in the state of Oklahoma to try to find somebody. It's a small department. It's a small county. There's not very many people around here. Everybody talks about it. Every day I hear, did you find that missing family yet? Did you find them? And no. That's my own answer. It messes with your confidence, there's no doubt, not being able to solve such an important case.
Perhaps due to the lack of new leads, media interest in the Jamesons' disappearance outside of Latimer County has slowed to a trickle.
Even right now, whenever I ask someone if they know about this family, a whole family that went missing, they have no idea what I'm talking about.
In the meantime, Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison's family remains desperate for answers.
It's hard to put yourself in the family's shoes. I've never had this happen to me, and I couldn't imagine it happening to me. It must be the toughest thing you could probably go through in a lifetime.
We've already had 7 months go by. The search has gotten kind of cold. I've gone through so many scenarios in my head. If they can help me find my kids, I'll do anything. I want my kids back.
To help the case, if anybody does know any information, they need to give us a ring. We need it. We're begging for it. If you know where they're at, tell us.
I would,
A powerful thunderstorm hits a small Illinois town in the middle of the night when one of its wealthiest couples is shot to death as they sleep.
My parents were still in bed.
This was clearly almost like a massacre. It was a scene that will stick out in my mind and memory for as long as I'll live. Detectives soon learned this royal family isn't what it appears to be.
They were kind of a dysfunctional family, actually.
Will the story hit the investigation as detectives search for clues?
There were reports of powerful thunder and lightning, heavy rain, and even some high winds.
The weather is just so violent that all of that stuff would have been obliterated.
Or will it end up helping catch a killer?
The weather is definitely a factor in recovering sometimes key evidence.
An hour north of Chicago, Illinois, and just 5 miles west of Lake Michigan, sits the affluent village of Libertyville Township.
Libertyville, actually my hometown, was referred to as a sleepy little town, a nice community to raise your family.
The homes were upscale. Property values a little bit more, a lot of nice businesses, had a real hometown feel.
It wouldn't be unusual for people to knock their doors. I mean, there was just very little crime. The usual, home burglaries occasionally, probably some juvenile mischief, things like that, but no very, very little violent crime, if any. In fact, here the only thing that locals really concern themselves with is the weather.
It's not just the snowstorms in the winter. The summers can be real scorchers. That hot, humid air makes it all the way to the north from the Gulf of Mexico, and that just fuels powerful thunderstorms, especially June through August. That's when the region can see half of its annual total.
One such storm occurred in the first week of June 1980.
On that night, there was probably one of the most violent thunderstorms, rainstorms that we'd seen in that area for quite a few years.
But this storm would play a critical role in Libertyville's most infamous murder case. It's late at night when a severe thunderstorm approaches Libertyville.
It started, I think it was around probably, 10 p.m. or so.
This storm turned out to be significant. It came in from the west, it was a prolific lightning producer, and it also kicked up winds. At the same time, unleashed heavy rain.
The sky just opened up and broke loose. Lightning, thunder, wind blowing. It was very violent for a number of hours.
As dawn breaks, the storm system has moved on, and the day is bright and sunny. But the tranquility doesn't last long.
Yeah, this is Billy Rouse. My parents were still in bed. They just noticed it. Where do you live?
As paramedics and police race to the location, they immediately recognize the home.
It belongs to one of the area's most prominent couples, 44-year-old Bruce and 38-year-old Darlene Rouse. Bruce Lee Rouse was born in 1936 in Mundelein, Illinois, just west of Libertyville. His family had deep roots in the area, going back to the 1880s.
At one point, Bruce's father was a mayor, and they lived the American dream. I mean, they had the fancy cars, they had the beautiful home, they had the businesses going, a hefty bank account, so they didn't want for anything. They needed it, they went and they bought it.
They were well known throughout the area. The Rouses were probably among the top families in town.
In the late 1950s, Bruce met and married a beautiful girl from Libertyville named Darlene J. Stenlund.
Like any young couple, they were in love. Bruce had ideas of becoming wealthy, and he worked hard at that.
Bruce bought a gas station in Libertyville, and in 1960, the couple welcomed a son, Kurt. 2 more children soon followed, Robin in 1963, and a year later, little Billy. Meanwhile, Bruce's business flourished.
Bruce owned several automotive repair shops, gas stations throughout the Libertyville area. He also had an interest in a cable television network, many real estate holdings throughout the area also.
He had a gas station that was right in downtown Libertyville. Very successful business.
Although his gas stations kept him busy, Bruce also had other pursuits.
Bruce was an avid hunter, and he collected many rifles and shotguns.
He got along with people. He was just really respected as a businessman who worked hard and earned his money.
His wife Darlene enjoyed the life of a socialite.
Darlene never worked. She had her bridge clubs. She was active with the Chamber of Commerce and different social groups, so that took up most of her time.
In 1975, the family moved into a spacious 13-room colonial mansion in Libertyville, nestled along the Des Plaines River.
Their home sat on 8 acres. It was a massive house, indoor pool. They had a stable on their property, a couple horses for the kids. They had the finer things in life. There's no question about that.
As the children grew up, Bruce and Darlene could afford the best for them.
Kurt, the oldest boy, and Robin both went to private school called Lake Forest Academy, which is a very exclusive school. Kurt was a guard on the football team. He was a runner-up state champion in wrestling through Lake Forest Academy.
Robin was the apple of her dad's eye. There was no question that Bruce Rouse in particular was really very doting on Robin.
Billy, was pretty young. I know he played soccer.
There was never a want from any one of those kids. If they needed something, they had it.
The Rouses were a well-respected family in the community.
But now, emergency and law enforcement are on the way to the Rouse house. When they arrive, 15-year-old Billy Rouse is in the kitchen with his sister, 16-year-old Robin.
Robin was absolutely hysterical, and she was pointing to the back of the house where the parents' bedroom was. Billy was talking on the house phone, and Kurt was nowhere to be seen at the time.
In the master bedroom, an unimaginable scene awaits them.
Someone had pulled the bed sheet up on the 2 parents. We did pull the sheet down.
Right away, they can tell that Bruce and Darlene have been shot in the face.
We saw the physical damage that had been to Darlene and Mr. Rouse, and knew that immediately that there was nothing we could do. It was so horrific that I don't think anything like it had been seen before.
After a wild summer thunderstorm encompasses the area, police are about to find themselves in the middle of a murder investigation like no other, where the storm could hold the key to a killer's identity.
The storm was in the background of the whole thing.
Libertyville, Illinois police have just discovered the bodies of 44-year-old Bruce Rouse and his 38-year-old wife Darlene, shot to death in their beds after a torrential thunderstorm came through town the night before.
These type of storms in the Midwest can be pretty common over the summer, storms are driven by strengthening winds aloft, and that can feed off a lot of really warm, humid air that can sustain itself even through the nighttime hours. They're also known to produce a lot of wind and a lot of lightning.
Homicide investigators from Libertyville and Lake County Sheriff's Department arrived to the Rouse estate. In the kitchen, two of the Rouse children, Billy and his older sister Robin, appear in shock. They tell police their older brother, 20-year-old Kurt, is staying in a small house out back. After being escorted back to the main house, police break the news to Kurt.
He was stunned. Robin was screaming. And Billy was mildly detached.
As deputies take the children outside for questioning, investigators examine the crime scene, and it's nothing short of gruesome.
Mrs. Rouse had received a single gunshot blast to her head. It had literally removed from the top of the bridge of her nose all the way up in a Y pattern through her forehead. We know that it was an up-close shotgun blast, easily within 24 inches or closer.
It completely decapitated her, basically, and obviously from that shot being fired, it caused quite a blood stain in the home.
He had also received a gunshot blast to his lower mouth and chin area.
And it blew the jaw away, a lot of his teeth. In addition to that gunshot wound, he was bludgeoned in the head. We actually found some wood pieces from the butt of a gun still embedded in his head.
But the killer didn't stop there.
He was stabbed 6 times in the heart. So it was a gruesome crime scene.
Was this personal, or a home invasion gone bad? As police examine the rest of the home, it doesn't look like there had been a break-in.
There was no indications inside of muddy footprints that anybody had come from outside, inside. No foreign hairs, no foreign substances, no fingerprints.
But they do notice that some of Bruce's most valuable possessions are gone.
Mr. Rouse, hunter. He kept all of his guns upstairs in the Rouse home, in a closet. All of the rifles, all of the shotguns.
There wasn't a gun left in that house, so we knew those were missing for sure.
Detectives hope the Rouse children can shed some light on what might have occurred.
3 different investigators attempted to interview the children separately. Billy, Kurt, they didn't show a lot of emotion. Robin was pretty hysterical.
But she manages to tell police about the previous night.
Robin was at a dance at her school that night, and she was with friends.
And she arrived home right around midnight. When she pulled into the driveway, Billy was out in the driveway in just a pair of blue jeans, no shoes or socks, no shirt or nothing. She asked Billy what he was doing.
She says Billy told her he was looking for matches in their father's car.
So Robin went in the home, thinking nothing of it, didn't hear anything from that point on.
In the morning, she says one of her father's employees called the house looking for him.
When she went in to check on her parents, she could see that there was a lot of blood, and her parents had been somehow killed. She went, she told Billy.
Billy tells the investigators that he was out with friends the night before and got home around 10:30. He assumed his dad was already in bed. He says he was watching TV in the rec room on the 2nd floor when his mother came home around 11:30 p.m.
The master bedroom was on the 1st floor. Billy is on the 2nd floor just above them.
He says they spoke for about 5 minutes, and then she said she was going to bed. Billy says Robin came home when he went to get matches from his dad's car at some point.
He said Dad generally left his keys in the ignition of the car.
Then Billy says he came back in and fell asleep on the couch.
Billy said I didn't hear anything because there was a storm that night.
Billy says the next thing he remembers is being awakened at 9 a.m. by his sister, who was hysterical after finding their parents' bodies.
Billy looked at his parents and covered his mom and his dad up with a sheet and called the sheriff's department.
When detectives speak with Kurt, he doesn't seem to know much more about his parents' murders.
Kurt said that he was with his girlfriend that night.
Kurt says after his girlfriend left at 11 p.m., he fell asleep. He says he only woke up once during the night from the loud thunderstorm.
Kurt had no indications, no knowledge as to what happened to his parents.
None of the children have any idea who would have done this. But before the interviews can continue, they are suddenly cut short.
Uncle appeared and admonished the kids and told them, "You're not talking to anybody till you talk to a lawyer." So that ended all questioning, period, of those children.
After the children are whisked away by relatives to meet with their attorney, detectives spread around the exterior of the Rouse home.
The police were looking for any type of evidence, whether it was blood droplets or whether it was footwear impressions that might have been left in the grass, on a sidewalk, in the gravel, in the dirt.
Unfortunately, the weather from the previous night has worked against them.
With the rain that was coming down, the way it was coming down, all of this would have been obliterated. The weather was just so violent that it destroyed it.
But when investigators examine Bruce's car, a few things catch their attention.
The keys were not in the ignition where they usually are. They were placed in the visor of the vehicle, and the wipers were in the full-on position. So it was obviously used during a rainstorm.
To investigators, it's puzzling.
That didn't really make sense with the timeline.
Because when Father got home from work, it wasn't raining. The weather was clear.
Why would his windshield wipers have been used?
Someone else must have driven the car sometime during the thunderstorm.
Somebody got in that car and turned the wipers on and removed the keys from the ignition to above the visor.
But why wouldn't they have taken a car that was right there for the taking? You would think if somebody was robbing the house, would take the car.
Investigators start to wonder if maybe the killer wasn't a strange robber.
It would lead me to believe that somebody that's close to that family had access to that car and drove it and brought it back.
But why? The vehicle is towed to be examined further as police canvass the area and speak with neighbors. But they all say the same thing.
They said, we could not have told the difference between the constant lightning and thunder that was going on throughout the night versus a shot.
As they ramp up the crime scene, detectives head to the medical examiner's office, hoping for a lead. When the autopsies are performed on Bruce and Darlene Rouse, it's clear Darlene was shot first.
They believe that Darlene died instantly, shot close range in the head. Bruce woke up at the noise, and then Bruce was shot in the face. When Bruce was shot, he was shot from the side, whereas when Darlene was shot, it was like right into the bed.
But that wound in itself would have not been enough to kill Bruce. If he would have received medical attention, he could have survived that.
Then they believe he was hit in the head with the barrel of the shotgun.
It was a very deep gash over the right eyebrow that actually caused a minor skull fracture. That also could have been treated, and Mr. Rouse could have survived that second wound.
But the final injuries proved fatal.
At the autopsy, they noted that there were 6 stab wounds directly into his heart. Each went into his heart.
I think, too, an investigator might suggest a crime of rage.
The pathologist estimates a time of death sometime in the early morning hours, which means all the children could have been home at the time.
The children didn't hear anything because there was a storm that night. That was their explanation.
At this point, the storm was probably still going strong. A heavy rain, it fell for the next hour, and it didn't stop for another half hour. Conditions finally calmed down again around 4:30 a.m.
With Bruce getting the most physical damage, investigators wonder if he was the main target.
The violence of the murder particularly of Bruce, where he was bludgeoned and stabbed, would have pointed more towards somebody who had a grudge.
As the people of Libertyville start locking their doors, detectives look into several new leads.
Perhaps this was a mafia hit.
The general consensus of the town was that Kurt was the killer.
Then, a key piece of evidence is discovered, thanks to the weather. Hours after a severe summer thunderstorm, the murdered bodies of businessman Bruce Rouse and his social wife Darlene are discovered by their kids. Locals in this quiet Chicago suburb of Libertyville are on edge.
It rocked the community. This respected family that lived in this small, very friendly community, suddenly wiped from the face of the earth. It really created a lot of anxiety and a lot of disturbance. Part of the concern of the community was that who did this? Why did they do it? Could other people be in harm's way? I mean, it really created a level of anxiety that you could imagine.
It was one of those things that was very unfortunate. Again, the basic reaction where the people couldn't believe that it happened. They were appalled. They were scared. Obviously, they were wondering if there was a killer running loose in their area. So the tensions were real high at that time.
As details of the murder spread, rumors swirl.
That Mr. Rouse was involved with the mafia, and that perhaps this was a mafia hit.
Bruce might have been involved, with the gangsters, and that the cable TV endeavor that he was involved in might have been a catalyst for someone to do harm to him.
I think that it was sort of normal for people to suspect that.
That turned out to be absolute nonsense. There was a rumor that Mrs. Rouse had a very domineering personality, and that maybe she had offended somebody who then wanted to come back and do harm to her or to her husband. That turned out to be nonsense as well. But again, just an indication of the types of rumors that can be generated when people have more questions than answers in their minds.
There were suggestions in the community that this might be more of a family-related thing.
Many people think it had to be one of the Rouse boys, specifically 20-year-old Kurt Rouse.
Kurt had a very unusual look to him at the time. He had very long, flowing blonde hair that was kind of frizzed out. This was back in Charles Manson days. And Manson had that crazy look, the frizzed out hair.
The general consensus of the town was that Kurt was the killer because of the way that Kurt looked and his actions and the friends that he hung around with.
And when forensic results come back on the cars, investigators wonder if there's some truth in the rumors.
There was nothing in the vehicles during subsequent searches that was of any evidentiary value to us. No foreign prints, no foreign hairs.
Investigators know the killer had to be someone who had access to the house and cars, with a lot of anger towards the Rouses.
It was a lack of evidence that roused my suspicion more than anything. So it was pretty obvious to me that the focus was going to be on those children.
Unfortunately, police are still having a tough time speaking to them until they get an unexpected call. Months after the murders, detectives hear from Billy's aunt.
Billy was now living with his aunt and his uncle. And the aunt called the lead detective in the case. And she said, Billy wants to see if he could help give you some additional information that could help solve this thing.
Detectives meet with the teenager, and he wants to look at some of the crime scene photos and discover more clues.
Billy talked to the police and pointed out some things that were missing, namely Darlene's purse.
And he looked at another picture and he said, the dresser here, my mom's jewelry box is missing from that dresser.
And he notes that the dressers have been pulled out. And he speculates that it looks like somebody might have been ransacking the dressers.
Could their original theory be correct?
Maybe this is a home invasion gone bad. Somebody was there to steal things of value, including a purse, money, jewelry, and the Rouses awoke during the course of this burglary, and then the killer turned weapons on them.
So we knew that we had some items that were missing from the house other than the weapons.
Although it still doesn't explain who drove Bruce's car and why it wasn't taken, which points to another theory.
In my mind, somebody made this look like a burglary by taking those items. It was pretty obvious, at least it was to me, that there was no foreign intruder.
It was at that point in October that there was a new development.
Investigators finally catch a break when they get a call from a local surveyor. The man says he was out in the shallow waters of the Des Plaines River.
The Des Plaines River fluctuates greatly depending on rainfall.
After a higher than normal rainfall the previous month, October was actually drier than normal, and that means the water levels were pretty low.
That's a hot time usually in a Chicagoland area there. So the water wasn't deep as it normally would be. It was shallow enough he could walk the river.
He says that's when he stumbled upon something in the water.
He saw what he thought was a pipe sticking up. When he pulled up this pipe, he discovered that it was a shotgun. So a call was made to our department. We responded to that area with our divers from our dive team and continued to try to search the river.
After searching the river for days, police make a huge discovery.
A number of shotguns were recovered from that river, probably 5 miles from the home where the Rouses were killed.
There were approximately 11 or 12 of them, and all of those guns had simply been thrown into the river.
All the guns belonged to Bruce Rouse.
We were able to find Darlene Rouse's jewelry box, her wallet, with her driver's license. There was still money in her wallet. None of her jewelry was taken. It was all there.
If the person was actually stealing these things to get money, wouldn't they have taken the cash out of her wallet? Wouldn't they have possibly tried to use the credit cards?
Unfortunately, the river's water has eliminated any forensic evidence.
There was no evidence that was found on the weapons. There was no blood, fingerprints, anything that actually could have been found by forensic experts.
But the discovery does prove one thing.
It just backed up my theory that this had to be somebody that set this thing up to look like a robbery.
With no firm suspects, police circle back to the Rouse children. They were the only ones there the night their parents were viciously killed. And turns out, they are set to inherit a lot of money.
Insurance payoff, I think the police could have looked at that as a motive.
Mr. Rouse, had a very successful business.
His estate was probably worth over $3 million. And then, aside from that, he had a $900,000 insurance policy on him also. There was a lot of money to be gained by this. So, couldn't rule that out.
As investigators look deeper, they learned the millionaire family was anything but perfect.
It was a family that had everything but had nothing.
And the weather has a hand in another tragedy that will stall the investigation for more than a decade. In October 1980, thanks to the recent dry month, investigators have discovered evidence in the Des Plaines River from the murders of Bruce and Darlene Rouse that proves robbery was not the motive.
Not only was it not a robbery, but it was somebody who was trying to make it look like a robbery.
And with the Rouse children inheriting their parents' estate and life insurance, could money have been the motive? It doesn't take long for investigators to uncover some dark family secrets.
They were kind of a dysfunctional family, actually. It was one of those types of families that just didn't get along.
Robin appeared to have the best relationship with her parents.
Robin, the daughter, was kind of more of a model student.
The oldest, Kurt, however, had been on the outs with his parents for several years.
Kurt was recognized more as a counterculture sort of character.
Kurt started hanging around with peers that got into the drugs and didn't get along with his parents at all.
But shockingly, of the 3 children, 15-year-old Billy was problematic for his parents.
Billy had his problems with authority. Billy was getting into trouble with the schools and doing some vandalism.
Billy was responsible for severely damaging 3 schools in the Libertyville area. The rest of Billy's education was in alternative schools.
Billy was constantly yelled at by his parents or left to his own devices.
Dad with the business, Mom with her social events, so Billy started the old drug scene, drinking, and this is at 15 years of age because they didn't pay attention to him. He was a troubled young man.
Investigators start to narrow their focus.
Even though people thought Kurt did it, the more we looked into it, and the more that we were able to definitely trace his activities and where he was at through friends and his girlfriend, that he was nowhere near that house.
Robin had been at a school dance, and there was really no evidence that suggested she was involved.
What does that leave? Billy, who lives in the house. who has access to all of these things in the house, who's always being scolded for his behavior.
Police want to follow up with the children, but are blocked at every turn.
There was a grand jury that was obviously convened at the time, but all three of the children took the Fifth Amendment and would not testify. So the investigation kind of stalemated. They always had a lawyer. Never talked to them.
There was very little physical evidence that was allowing the police to go further.
During the next 2 years, the children inherit proceeds from the Rouse estate and Bruce's life insurance.
Anything that those kids wanted, all they had to do was call the lawyer and they got it. It's that simple.
Kurt moves out west, while Robin attends college in Wisconsin. Billy continues to live with relatives. More than a decade later, investigators get a surprising call from police in Florida about Billy Rouse.
Billy, in 1984, he moves to Key West, Florida. I was keeping tabs on him through the Key West Police Department.
Through the years, Billy's desire for self-indulgence only increased.
It was a life of partying and drinking and smoking your way through a lot of money.
Billy was spending probably around $20,000 a month on alcohol and drugs that he was feeding to his friends.
Until all the money ran out.
He hung around all the seedy bars in Key West, Florida. He had no income. He had gone through every bit of his inheritance. It was gone.
That's when he gets arrested.
We got a telephone call from Key West that Billy had been a lookout in a bank robbery.
With Billy in custody, investigators believe now is the time to make a move.
There's not going to be any better opportunity than to try to go down and see if we can talk to this kid, so I rustled up a couple of our detectives that worked on the case, and we flew to Key West.
Investigators meet with the now 31-year-old as he sits in a Florida jail.
I said, Bill, isn't it time to put those demons to rest?
Shockingly, he agrees.
Billy then gave his statement on tape as to what had happened.
According to Billy, on the night of June 5th, 1980, he came home after partying with friends.
He says when he walks into the house, his mom is in the kitchen. She confronts him.
She walked out of me as soon as he smelled like liquor. I said, yeah, what about it? Okay. And she says, yeah, don't worry about it. You're going to be shipped out the military school. I'm just over it. You're going to be just like your brother. You moron.
He had the most deep-seated hatred for his mother. He said all she does is rag at me all the time. After being admonished by his mother, he went up to the rec room, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and smoked the joint.
That's when he decides enough's enough.
I decided I was going to get rid of my mom.
So he pulls out his dad's shotgun from the closet and started wiping it down and cleaning it while he's thinking about it, and decided that he's going to do this. He went into his kitchen and he grabbed a knife out of the drawer.
It's now after midnight. There's a horrendous lightning storm going on. There's nobody else in the house except Billy, his mom, and his dad.
He went to his parents' bedroom and watched them sleep for a moment.
Okay, go ahead. So what did you do then? So I walked in the room, took 16 gauge, put it up to her head, and the trigger went off. I remember pulling it, but the trigger went off.
I don't know whether you would call that like a defense mechanism, or you can't bring yourself to say, I killed my mother. So you say the gun went off?
Then what did you do? Well, my dad sat up real quick, looked at me, and the trigger went off again.
He said his father falls back on the bed and he starts convulsing. Billy goes around to his dad's side of the bed now, and he takes the butt of the shotgun and he hits his dad in the head as hard as he can.
I don't know how many times I had my head, but that didn't work. He was still. And I didn't want him misery. So I grabbed the knife and I stabbed him until he quit moving.
Although not planned, the storm actually worked in Billy's favor.
If anybody would have heard it, it didn't hurt, because he wasn't that far away from the home. But with the violent weather that we had there, I mean, it was so loud. Any type of a shotgun or a gun going off, there's no way you could have heard it.
Afterward, Billy says his mind was racing.
I figured, I might have to do this, man. I gotta do something, man. I'm gonna
says he cleaned himself up and tosses his clothes in a garbage bag.
I went back to their room. I figured I'd make it look like a robbery.
He then takes the jewelry box. He takes the purse. He then pulls out the drawers to make them look like they're being ransacked. He then steals all the rifles and shotguns, and he thinks, I'm going to get rid of this stuff.
After stashing them in the trunk of his dad's car, Billy is surprised by Robin when she comes home.
What did you say? Well, so I came out to get some matches. Those matches I need to have had in this car.
After Robin went to bed, Billy says he drove to the river just as the heavens opened up.
It was coming down in sheets.
And he said the winds were so high and the rain was blowing sideways, there was nobody on the road. And he said he had no concern whatsoever that anybody was going to be driving by and seeing him unload this stuff into the river.
Billy says then he came home and went to bed. He says he doesn't regret killing his parents, but he's tired of living with it.
Man, it's eaten me up 15 years. I don't really don't give a about my life right now. Look at the way I've lived.
Billy Rouse is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and is extradited back to Illinois. In 1996, 16 years after the murders of his parents, he goes to trial. Despite his confession, Billy pleads not guilty.
Of course, his defense was that the confession was coerced. It was not very believable. We all sat there and watched the videotape. The courtroom was fairly riveted. You could hear a pin drop.
On August 10, 1996, Billy is sentenced to 80 years in prison and will be eligible for parole in the year 2035.
He had to be sentenced under 1980s law. And the law at the time was that he could only get a maximum of 40 years on his mother's homicide and 40 years on his father's homicide.
Although finally solved, the case of the Rouse murders continues to haunt the people of Libertyville.
I think it's a lesson to us all. I feel sorry for the Rouses. Any of us who have had kids know that it can be a rough road. And to have it end in such a horrific manner is really a tragedy.
In 2011, a young woman is last seen walking home from a nightclub in Swindon. She never returns.
She's disappeared in the middle of the night. What could have happened to her? Where is she?
About 400 to 500 members of the public turned up to help search the forest.
Bluebells grow in the spring, and there's lots of deer, owls, and there's quite a lot of rare wildlife. But it's a large expanse. It's around 18 square kilometres. Quite easy to get lost.
During the day, it's beautiful, it's tranquil, you can hear the sounds of nature. But at night time, when darkness comes, it's the last place you want to be. It's chilling.
The investigation becomes much larger than police could have ever anticipated.
It absolutely shook the community of Swindon. A lot of anger that someone could do this to someone that totally didn't deserve it.
Which, at that point, you could literally have struck me down with lightning. That was not what I was expecting to happen.
Savernake Forest, located in Wiltshire, one of the safest counties in the UK, lies 15 miles south of Swindon, in the southwest of England.
Savernake is a large forest situated just outside of Marlborough, just over the border in Oxfordshire. It extends over many, many acres, and whilst there are tracks and paths through it, large parts of it are effectively wilderness and peaceful, law-abiding place.
A very beautiful place. There are a multitude of different trees, parkland, people take their dogs for walks there, and it's a very popular place, particularly in the summer.
It's really rare for crimes to occur of this nature anywhere, but in rural locations even more so.
That all changes on the 19th of March 2011, when a local young woman is reported missing after failing to return home from a night out.
These kind of incidents are very, very unusual and clearly have significant community impact when they do happen.
It was so unusual for her to go missing in these circumstances, for any girl of that age to go missing in these circumstances.
woman is identified as 22-year-old Sean M. O'Callaghan, an office worker who lives in Swindon.
So Sean was a young woman in her 20s. She lived with her boyfriend. By all accounts, she was a young woman who had her life in front of her, and she had those aspirations and dreams that everyone has in their young 20s.
Sean was a very popular girl. Lots of people knew Sean. She had lots of friends.
Everybody's spoken about Sean was just saying she was a lovely girl.
Sean's boyfriend alerts the police after waking up to find that she never returned home from her walk back from the nightclub just half a mile away.
The first person to call the police was Kevin Reap, who was Sean's boyfriend, and he called police at about 9:30 in the morning. So as far as he knew, she was meeting up with friends, and they were going to end up in a nightclub in Old Town in Swindon called Suju Nightclub.
Saturday night in Swindon would be buzzing. There would be people out and about, going out and enjoying themselves, going to pubs and clubs and restaurants, just like any Saturday night in any town. Just before 3 a.m. that night, Sian decides to break away from her group of friends and decides she wants to go home. And she leaves the nightclub just before 3 a.m. Sian only lived 800 metres away from Swindon town centre. She hadn't far to go. She left on her own, but she wouldn't have been feeling any kind of danger. She had a pleasant evening. She was going home to the house she shared with her boyfriend Kevin.
He'd had intermittent contact with her throughout the evening, but when she didn't turn up by about 3:30, 4:45 in the morning, he sent her a message on her phone asking where she was. Clearly, this message was never answered.
He starts to worry because she isn't responding to his messages, to his attempts to contact her. He sends a message to her at 3:24 a.m. with one word: worried.
And this was highly out of character. There was no precursor events, there was no arguments, there was no discussion about her leaving. It was an unprecedented event within that family, and there was immediate concern. So her disappearance was treated as a high-risk missing person case.
Boyfriend Kevin is now incredibly alarmed. He gathers together people, friends, anyone he can get hold of, and they start looking around the surrounding area, and they're incredibly concerned.
We get many people who go missing people. There's thousands that go missing every single year. And whilst everyone is treated very importantly, you know those ones which just put the flag up straight away and go, this is a real concern.
At the time, the senior investigating officer, Steve Fulcher, was my boss. I spoke to him and he asked me to come into Gable Cross Police Station the following morning. He went through the circumstances of Sian going missing and the initial fast-track actions that were being pursued to help identify where she was.
At that point, we are thinking, how can we try and locate Sian? What could have happened? Has she fallen over? Is she hurt in any way? Or is it something a little bit more serious and that someone has taken her and she's come to some harm? So in any high-risk missing person inquiry, we will be utilising the media to try and identify where she could be, utilising CCTV opportunities. If we know where someone was, we could be searching that area, we can be making inquiries, we can be looking at our intelligence systems and trying to find out if anybody is in that area at the time that is of concern.
So when a call of a missing person comes into police, uniformed colleagues would be sent out and they would go and speak to the person who had reported them missing. They would search the home to make sure that the person hadn't actually come home and was just in a different place than expected. They would then make initial inquiries with friends and relatives to see if anybody knew where she might be, and then make inquiries with hospitals to see if she'd potentially been injured and ended up in hospital. When these proved fruitless, they then called in a CID where I was working. We were made aware of all the details around her going missing, and as much detail as they were aware of at that point about where her night had led her. Once we'd had a briefing, we were then allocated different jobs to do, and my job was to go and search the routes that she would have taken from the nightclub back to her home address she shared with her boyfriend. Partly my purpose for retracing the steps was A, to make sure she hadn't fallen somewhere and was injured, but B, also to scope for CCTV. And one of the CCTV cameras I located was at a pub called the Goddard Arms, which was not far down the road, but on the opposite side of the road to where the nightclub was that Sian had last been seen.
This became the last known sighting of Sian. What we could see from that CCTV image is that when she went out of screen in the building opposite, there was flashing amber lights, which could hypothesise were from a car pulling up, putting the hazard warning lights on.
The car is stationary. The car is not moving. So that would indicate that the driver of the car had some reason to stay there and to stop. Was he conversing with someone? Was it Sean? Was he talking to her? Was he offering her a lift? The car then drives off and there's no other sign of Sean. The police make inquiries, house to house, door to door inquiries in the area. They can't put her past that particular spot. They speak to many people and that is the last known sighting. So the police theory at that time is that Sean got into that car.
The investigation into Sean O'Callaghan's disappearance has escalated to a suspected kidnapping. Police are focused on identifying the car seen in CCTV footage, as the initial hours are crucial to finding her alive. Wiltshire police are investigating the disappearance of 22-year-old Sean O'Callaghan, who vanished after a night out in Swindon in the early hours of March 19, 2011. Sean was last seen on CCTV, possibly getting into a car, and detectives suspect she may have been kidnapped. Their focus is to identify the vehicle and its owner.
It became our preferred hypothesis and Steve's preferred hypothesis that it was that car that had picked Sean up, and we were left with a grainy black and white image of a car. So we'd looked at that image and various people gave different thoughts on what car it might be. People thought it was a Mondeo, an Audi, a Volvo, various other makes.
The police also found further CCTV footage down the road, this time from a colour camera, that was able to show that the car in question was green and that it had a yellow square on the side of the door, which made police suspect that this was a taxi or a cab.
We were unsure what car it was, but we used some specialist services to try and identify what the car was, and it came back within a very short space of time that it was believed to be a green Toyota Avensis estate. At that point, we were thinking, well, let's put this out to the media.
Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher used the press to put out press releases asking for anybody with any information about Sean. Friends and relatives of Sean were putting up posters and they were posting on social media, so as getting the news out as far and wide as possible so as many people knew that Sean was missing and were able to help look for her.
Coach loads of people came out, stopped what they were doing to go out and look for this missing woman who people deeply cared about. There was grave concern that something could have happened in that small area, particularly to a young female alone at night. If you didn't know about this girl, it was because you hadn't already been out of the house. Her name was everywhere, her face was everywhere. Any girl of that age that goes missing and could have potentially come to some harm would be a very important case regionally. I think just the nature of the fact that it was so unusual to happen, it became national news, and the media latched onto it because she was an attractive girl who had gone missing and her picture was everywhere, and there was real concern within the community as well.
Sean's boyfriend Kevin made an emotional appeal at a press conference for Sean to come home, and for anyone who had any information as to her whereabouts to please come forward. This was a young man who loved Sean very much, and that comes across in that appeal. And he is desperately worried, desperately concerned. He wants his girlfriend to come home. And he is devastated at the fact that she is missing.
Police see that Sean's phone had been active near Savernake Forest shortly after she went missing, prompting a search by law enforcement and community members.
I think it demonstrates how important it was to the communities of Swindon and Wiltshire at the time, and the priority they placed on it, that people gave up their time to go and search for Sean. And we'd had some information regarding her phone which indicated that she could have been in Savernake, and we didn't appeal for the public to come and try and help us search, but the public had picked up on that, and they responded in their thousands. Literally coaches of people went out to Savernake, and it was logistically quite a challenge for us because we wanted to make sure that those searches were able to effectively contribute to the searches that took place. We didn't want people duplicating it, but there's also a health and safety issue there as well because they were walking through forest. It's not even land. Some of them didn't have the right equipment or footwear to be able to do that. So it's tricky because you don't want to refuse people because they're trying to help you and they're trying to help find Sian, and that was what we were all trying to do. But at the same time, you don't want anyone else to be hurt or harmed as a result of their good intent.
I think people probably put themselves in the shoes of her parents and her boyfriend, and they thought if this was happening to our family, then that's exactly what we'd want others to do.
As search teams comb the forest, detectives looking into the vehicle have made a breakthrough.
An officer who had been reviewing the camera footage, the video footage from our traffic cars that were in on patrol that night, who came into the briefing room with Steve Fulcher and myself and a few others, and said that they'd identified a taxi leaving the Old Town area with at the right time, and they had the number plate from the traffic car. When they checked that plate, it came back as a dark green Toyota Crevensis on a 57 plate, which was obviously corroborating what we'd been told by the other experts. Well, it was a monumental breakthrough. This was then the Tuesday lunchtime, effectively, so we were already some way into the inquiry, but this gave us a very strong suspect.
And that registration plate showed that the car was registered to a man called Christopher Halliwell. Christopher Halliwell was a 47-year-old taxi driver who lived at Ashbury Avenue in Swindon. He was cohabiting with his partner and he had 2 daughters and a son. He didn't stand out to the police as the type of person they were looking for initially. The police immediately wanted to know about the movements of Christopher Halliwell. They wanted to know what fares he took, where he went in his taxi. They wanted to know everything about him.
We look into, was he working at the time, where was he, his location, his phones, all that kind of thing. But ultimately, at that point, we just had somebody in that area who was driving that car. We didn't know if it was the same car, we didn't know any more than that. But it gave us suspicion that he became someone of interest to us at that point.
They spoke to his bosses, they spoke to the people who ran the taxi rank, and they told police that Halliwell phoned into them at 1:30 a.m. and said he was tired, he was going home, he was knocking off for the night, basically. And yet 90 minutes later, his taxi is still seen travelling around the streets of Swindon. Halliwell never went home. So what was he doing during those 90 minutes?
Police decide to conduct surveillance on Halliwell.
The police, bearing in mind they're dealing with a missing person here, they have to have hope that Sian could still be alive, and that if Halliwell has kidnapped her, that she is being kept somewhere but is still alive. The police want to find Sian, they want to rescue Sian, they want to bring her back safely to her family. They hope by putting Halliwell under surveillance, and Halliwell has no idea that the police are looking at him. The police are hopeful that Halliwell unknowingly leads them to where Sian is. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Halliwell goes about his normal routine. He's working as a taxi driver, he's spending time with his family, he's taking fares and going along with his normal daily routine. However, there were things that he was observed doing whilst under surveillance that firmed up the police interest in him. The police also observed him cleaning out the back of his taxi with a blue fluid. And the police also observed him setting a fire to burn things in the middle of the night, which the police thought was unusual.
They found articles of a cloth material. One of these was actually the seating from his vehicle, so from the back seat of his car. They were able to find that in one of the bins. So just various articles that were being dumped around and about. I believe that the ones in the fire were actually too badly burnt for them to be able to ascertain what they were.
There was an item, a perfume bottle that he discarded into a skip. And whilst taxi drivers would always clean their cars, it was giving us suspicion that this was more than just a routine clean after passengers, that he was going at lengths to try and remove forensic evidence from the car.
I think the most worrying thing, the thing that struck and a chord with all of us, given that he was our prime suspect at that point, was that he put up posters about Sian in his car. And by this time there was national interest, but the local interest was immense in Sian and trying to find her. So posters had been produced and circulated widely, and he'd actually put those up in his taxi. And that was something that was troubling all of us.
So the senior investigating officer, Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher, was working on the hypothesis that Sian was alive and being kept somewhere. This was what's known as a crime in action, so it was very fast moving. They were following Mr. Fulcher, and they were very much relying on members of the public to assist them in their investigation. Whilst following Mr. Halliwell, they were alerted to the fact that he had gone into a supermarket in one of these out-of-town shopping places just on the edge of Swindon.
They observe Halliwell getting out of his vehicle, and particularly alarming for the police, they observe him leave with a huge ending your life.
Steve Fulcher's concern at that point in circumstances such as that, and clearly we didn't want that to happen. That wouldn't help us to find Sian, and it would definitely not help her family or her friends getting justice. So the decision was taken to arrest him at that point and to carry out what's known in policing world as an urgent interview.
Urgent interview is where time is running out and the life of the missing person is under threat, and the safety of that person and the chance of recovering that person alive is the main priority. So rather than take the individual to a police station to talk them through their Miranda rights and have them consult with a solicitor, they conduct an urgent interview right there at the scene of arrest.
When questioned, will Christopher Halliwell admit what happened that night and the whereabouts of Sian O'Callaghan? Wiltshire police are investigating the disappearance of 22-year-old Sian O'Callaghan, who went missing in the early hours of March 19, 2011, after a night out in Swindon. Using CCTV, investigators discover that Sian most likely got into a taxi owned by a man named Christopher Halliwell. The senior investigating officer, Steve Fulcher, has Halliwell arrested.
2 officers were sitting in a vehicle. When Mr. Halliwell was arrested, he was put into the back of this vehicle, and straight away these officers asked him a number of questions. Where is Sian? How did she get there? You know, all the sort of questions, trying to ascertain where Sian was.
He wasn't initially forthcoming. He simply didn't comment on his involvement at that point. He just said he wanted to go to the police station. So Steve intervened at that point because that would have routinely been what would have happened. The urgent interview had effectively been exhausted. There'd always been a suspicion from some of the telephone data we've been able to acquire that he could have been out to Barbary Castle at one point.
Fulcher commands search teams to focus on the areas surrounding Barbary Castle.
Now, Barbary Castle was a beauty spot on the outskirts of Swindon, and Steve had initiated some searches that were taking place. So on that morning, the Thursday morning, there were search teams in and around Barbary Castle.
He made the decision to meet Halliwell and question him himself at that location. So he instructed the detectives to take him there, and he would urgent interview him there. His reasoning for that course of action was he believed that if Halliwell was being taken close to where Sian's body was and speaking to him as the SIO, that he might realise the game's up here and he might cooperate better.
Fulcher's unorthodox approach raises some concerns within the police force.
I support Steve on what he did. It was a very brave decision, and you need courageous SIOs in that scenario. And my role at that point, I actually drove Steve out there along with his PA, who was making notes of everything that had been happening over the preceding days. And as I drove him out there, I said to Steve, "Are you really sure you want to do this?" Because it was such an unusual thing. And he looked me in the eyes, really, and he'd spoken to Sian's family, he'd met Sian's family, and he said, "I've promised Sian's family I'm going to get her back, and this is the only way."
Mr. Halliwell gets out of the car and goes off with Detective Superintendent Fulcher, and Mr. Fulcher asks him, "Where's Sian?" Initially, he won't talk to Mr. Fulcher. He won't answer any questions. He keeps saying he wants his solicitor. But eventually, just as Mr. Fulcher thinks he's going to have to give up and take him back to the police station, Mr. Halliwell says, "Have you got a car? I'll take you to her."
After a few minutes, Steve Halliwell and his PA got into a marked car and started to head off from Barbary Castle, and I followed them. And at that point, Probably going back to Gable Cross Police Station. I thought we'd be that further. Loud. Which, to this day, I was just nervous of showing Steve Fulcher in the cold light of day what he'd done to Sian.
Brought out the search teams to do a proper forensic sweep of the area to see if they could find Sian. And the search officers would have a lead search officer who would dictate exactly what formation they used, and they would, in a very studied manner, they would work their way down the area that Mr. Halliwell had pointed to until they found what they were looking for.
The investigation into Sian's disappearance reaches a devastating end.
When I received a call that he'd taken Sian's body, in utter despair that she's dead, very pleased that we'd managed to find her. And at that point, I started to put in motion forensic teams to go to the scene, traffic teams to secure the area, all the procedures that you'd normally undertake when a body is found. He disposed of her from the road into a ditch, which was some distance away from the raised road in undergrowth, that it would have meant it would have been a long time before she was found. I believe that the location was such that even the farmers didn't go into that particular location much, so it would have been some time.
Sian was found naked from the waist down, and she had died as a result of a stab wound to her head. It was a particularly brutal murder.
I hope that he didn't sexually abuse her. The fact that she was naked from the waist down obviously raises that concern. There was never any conclusive evidence to say that she was sexually assaulted. He did whatever he did, and I just hope that he killed her quickly and as far as possible painlessly from Sian's perspective. The fact that he took the steps he did afterwards are chilling. You know, the fact that he chose to put posters of Sian being missing in his car, driving around Swindon trying to get other taxi fares, goes a lot to say about who he is.
Sadly, I was the one that had to also tell them that Sian had been found. That is something you never get used to. As police officers, we deal with some harsh things that we have to deal with, and what we call passing death messages. This is one of the things that we do, and no matter how many times you do it, it never gets easier. So passing that message that's one of those jobs that will live with me. It doesn't come up in my mind very often, but it's there, and it was hard. They were devastated, but you're there to support them and help them through it. So it was a very difficult case, but I remained with the family throughout the whole of the case.
D.S. Fulcher has the harrowing task of contacting the police station and informing them that they have found Sian O'Callaghan's body. They then send in a team of forensic scientists to preserve the scene, and they make arrangements for Christopher Halliwell to be returned to the police station in Swindon, where he can be read his rights, meet with his solicitor, and then undergo questioning. They are still at the scene where Sian O'Callaghan's body was found. He and D.S. Fulcher, in that short period of time together, had built up somewhat of a rapport together. D.S. Fulcher had successfully got inside Halliwell's head and had gained some trust sharing a cigarette, and Halliwell leans into D.S. Fulcher and said, "Me and you should have a chat." And D.S. Fulcher, not knowing what was coming, said, "Yes, okay, what do you want to talk about?" Perhaps thinking Halliwell was going to give more details about Shannon's case, he instead says to D.S. Fulcher, "Do you want another one?" And D.S. Fulcher inquires, "What?" To which Halliwell replies, "Another body."
Steve then came over to me and said that he was going to take us to another. And I had to clarify, what do you mean another? And he said to another body, which at that point you could literally have struck me down with lightning. That was not what I was expecting to happen.
Christopher Halliwell's admission forces investigators to confront the chilling possibility that they may be dealing with a serial killer.
Yeah, to find one body is shocking. To be told that there's a second, I don't think many police officers would have that in their career. And I told the senior officer straight away, the Deputy Chief Constable at the time, and had to inform them that this was the case. And then straight away that led us to believe that, this was going to be bigger than we initially thought.
D.S. Fulcher found himself in such a precarious position because he had a number of choices to make and so little time to make them. Because this was a moment in time. This is a moment in time between two people, two individuals, between a killer and the detective hunting him down. And the killer has all the power because the killer has the knowledge. The detective wants the knowledge. He has to make the decision on what way to go, because if he goes off path either way, the whole moment could be over. The whole moment could be ruined, and the information that he really needs could be lost forever. He decides to break away from the PACE protocols. The PACE protocols are the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1985. He decides to break away from that and decides to go along with Halliwell and question him without arresting him for this new confession. Doesn't read him his rights, doesn't get him a solicitor. He decides to take that risk for moral reasons, because he knows I have the chance here to uncover the body of a human being that's also missing.
It is a decision that jeopardizes Fulcher's career.
Fulcher has the position of, if he takes Halliwell back, procedure dictates, PACE regulations, that you have to take the individual back, formally charge them, offer them a lawyer, read them their rights, and a process has to go through for a police investigation to start. However, he has created this unique bond with this violent killer, and he is aware that this bond is fragile. He is aware that this stream of information, which previously not appeared from Halliwell, or indeed at any other point in the case, might only exist in that moment. It might only exist there and then in this forlorn place that they're standing, where this poor young life had been snuffed out. And he is in a position where he is stood there with Halliwell looking at this killer, knowing that this information wasn't available 10 minutes ago and it might never be available again.
Detective Superintendent Fulcher thought, I'm going to go with this. So they got back into a vehicle and Mr. Halliwell directed him out to a field, again in the middle of nowhere, in Gloucestershire. And he said, there's a body in that field. And following an excavation by police, they located the remains of another female called Becky Godden Edwards.
In a shocking twist, Christopher Halliwell leads Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher to a second body. However, as Halliwell has not been read his Miranda rights, the case becomes significantly more complicated. In the early hours of March 19, 2011, 22-year-old Shan O'Callaghan disappears after a night out in Swindon. CCTV shows her getting into a taxi driven by Christopher Halliwell, who is later arrested. Detective Steve Fulcher brings Halliwell to a search site near Barbary Castle, where Halliwell eventually reveals where he buried Shan. But just as they're about to return to the station, he leads Fulcher to the body of another young woman.
The body that was recovered in Eastleach was that of Becky Godden Edwards, a young woman in her early 20s who disappeared on the 27th of December 2002 after being seen getting into a taxi outside a nightclub in Swindon. Becky had a long family family around her. She was very well loved, very well liked, popular young woman. But unfortunately, she had fallen on some hard times around the time of her disappearance.
I still believe we would never have found Sean, we would never have found Becky if it weren't for the intervention of Steve in the urgent interview.
Halliwell confesses what happened the night he abducted Becky to investigators at the scene.
Halliwell explained in very simple, concise language that he'd taken Becky from Swindon, that he'd driven her out to where we were, that he'd killed her, that he'd indicated that he'd strangled her. He indicated that he'd left her behind the wall, and we were stood in the field with a wall as the boundary. And he then explained that he'd come back the following day, and that's when he'd buried her. And he indicated to Steve and I the point where he buried her. And what stands to me, and which I'll never forget, is it was his eyes. So he had blue eyes, and they were piercing and steely. And he was very matter-of-fact in what he told us.
There's been a lot of speculation about whether Christopher Halliwell has killed more people, and I know Steve Fulcher believes he has. I know of some of the inquiries that have gone on since then, and to date, nothing has been found to show that he has killed anybody else. He had a lot of lone female passengers during that time, and I suspect if you're subsequently one of those and you knew that he was later convicted of double murders, you'd be very concerned.
Well, there was a brief discussion about whether or not there was anyone else that he needed to take us to, and the words that he used were something very similar to "not today," which stays with me as well. But at that point, Steve, I think, felt that we had to sort of draw under a line under what was happening. So Steve and Halliwell went back in the police car, and they went off and to Cable Cross police station.
The trial is delayed due to Detective Fulcher's actions during the investigation.
So, Mr. Halliwell would have been taken the following day. He would have been remanded in custody, and he would have been taken the following day to the Magistrates' Court, where again he would have been remanded in custody for further investigations and for the trial, for preparation for the trial. During the course of the investigation, one of the avenues they had to go down was a thing called a voir dire. This was when they went to court to hear the facts of the case, and the facts of the case were around where Mr. Halliwell was not given access to his solicitor and where he was not cautioned when he should have been. So this had to be heard in front of a judge. Now this hearing took five days, and during that they were given all the evidence. Mr. Fulcher was given his opportunity to put forward why he didn't comply with the requirements of an arrested person. The judge, however, in this case ruled for Mr. Halliwell and said that anything from the point of his initial urgent interview, anything after that was not allowed as evidence within the case. So this included pointing out where Sean was, and it included pointing out where Becky Gordon Edward was. Thankfully, they had a fair amount of other evidence, forensic evidence, in relation to the murder of Sean, and they were able to build a case around her murder. However, around Becky Gordon Edwards, there was only the word of Mr. Halliwell, who had taken them to the field where she was located. So they had to disallow that from the hearings that went to the first trial at court. Yes, they had their daughter returned to them, but it also meant that the person who had admitted to killing her by taking officers to the field where she was buried, that evidence was not allowed, and there was no trial in relation to her.
Christopher Halliwell appears in court on the 31st of May 2012 for the murder of Sean O'Callaghan and pleads not guilty.
I think is well known. It took many years for this case to come to court for a number of reasons, but the trial from memory is 2016. I gave evidence immediately after Steve Fulcher, and that was quite challenging really, for as is his right, Halliwell had sacked his defence team and represented himself at his trial. And when Steve Fulcher had finished giving his evidence, Halliwell had made some really unsavoury comments towards Steve, basically gloated in the fact that he felt he'd ruined Steve's career, which is a bizarre and random thing for anyone to take pleasure in, but that was what Halliwell did. But those comments and statements caused a bit of a ripple through the court. certainly through the public gallery.
He represented himself in court, which made the spectacle even more unbearable for the families of Sian and Becky, and the performance of watching him wriggle around, details, denial, failure to answer any questions. This was a man who didn't feel any level of shame at what he'd done or at what he was accused of.
His demeanour in court was what you would expect from a hardened criminal, from an utterly depraved, evil man. He was smirking at family members. He was looking quite relaxed, like he hadn't a care in the world, like he was totally free from worry. He didn't really care.
His defence was that she attacked him, and it was self-defence. That was a man just trying to grasp onto anything that he could think of in those moments when he knew he was going to be convicted and face a full life tariff.
19th October 2012, Christopher Halliwell pleads guilty to her murder. He is sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years.
It's indescribable. Unless you've been through it yourself, you can't ever really relate to it. We can all imagine what it would be like to lose a loved one, but not many people will have lost a loved one in these circumstances. And that will be very, very difficult for anyone to come to terms with. And you have to admire the families of Sian and Becky for the way they have handled coming to terms with what Halliwell did to them.
As Halliwell is being transported from the prison to the court, there are people on the streets. The community are out and they are angry. They are throwing things at the prison van. They are banging their fists off the prison van side. There is a level of anger and outpouring of rage at what this man has done. It is reminiscent of similar actions from the public when you're dealing with particularly infamous criminals who have carried out some truly horrific crimes. So that demonstrates the level of infamy that Halliwell was beginning to attain and the anger that the public had for him in Swindon.
Killers very often don't look or appear outwardly evil. They look entirely like normal people moving amongst all of us. And when people are confronted with the horror of this individual, a man that was driving a taxi that was potentially capable of taking any number of individuals in the course of their job, driving around the town, people's feelings, emotions about the case were each boiling point. There had been murals around Swindon of Sian's likeness. She was called Swindon's Angel. There was vigils, there was candles lit everywhere, commemorations in churches. Her name and her memory were constantly on local news, radio, national news.
Police did an amazing job. They very quickly ascertained the vehicle that was being used, and this was great police work to have the forethought to look through the ANPR cameras on traffic vehicles, and then Detective Superintendent Fulcher locating him, arresting him before he was able to do anything with the tablets which potentially he had bought to harm himself. You know, the police work was fabulous. There are questions around the way Mr. Halliwell was dealt with when he was apprehended, but ultimately 2 women were returned to their families because of the actions that he took that day.
I think it's well documented and well publicised that other SIOs would have dealt with this case differently. I'd go as far as saying that I don't know any other SIO who would have taken the steps that Steve did when he went out to Barbary Castle. But perhaps that's a reflection on us rather than Steve, because what I would say as well is that if one of my daughters went missing, I'd want Steve to investigate it because I'd have the confidence that he would find her, and that's what happened in this case.